Hi, everybody. This is David, and welcome to your week 2 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership 655, Viterbo University, Pupil Services, and Non-Discrimination. Welcome back. So, it is a brisk 40 degrees, 2 inches of rain fell here, January 22nd, 2018. Doesn't quite make sense. Wow. So, yeah, lawns are just flooded and things like that. Crazy. I grew up in northern Wisconsin where we had snow from the beginning of November all the way through April. And I remember playing baseball games. And it would, varsity baseball in April with the snow pushed up against the snow fence, which was around the field back then. So dirty snow, the stuff that didn't melt until first week of June. But anyway, thank you for being very active posters to this class and for all of your insight, for sharing of documents. I greatly appreciate it. We are off to a terrific start. I want to say that whatever I share in this class, it comes from my perspectives. It comes from, research I've done, but there are 422 districts in Wisconsin, something like that. Everyone is going to have their own take, their own flavor, every district on how they meet the needs of students, and also legal, counsel that works with schools on, here's how to assemble your release of information, things like that. Those will all be different. It doesn't mean obviously that one is right, one is wrong. It's just that things are different. So as I go through some of these things, if you identify a practice in your district which you think is much more evolved than something I'm sharing, please point it out and say, hey, Dave, you said this, but this is actually something like we took it a step further, and here's what we do. So please, I am very open to fostering discussions and looking at different ways that things are done. I think that's a strength of this class. People can share documents and then can share perspectives saying, here's what we've done when we've encountered something similar. Here's the successes we found, here's the struggles we found, and kind of, some different paths we tried to navigate to get to our end goal. So just want to say that, please do not feel that whatever I am saying is the convergent, absolute only way to do things. That's one of the cool things about Pupil Services and being a director of special education is you have, because of the IP process, you have many divergent paths to get to the least restrictive environment and what you deem it would be the best plan for meeting the needs of the child. So, and we're going to see that when we come through our case studies with Bruce for allergy. Where does the IEP fit with possibly 504 or like a medical plan, health plan, things like that. How do all of those come together? So I'm going to, share my, thoughts on those, once they're turned in, but each of those will be different, and it's going to be very interesting to see how people approach that, because I'm sure everyone will have a plan that's going to get to an outcome, which will protect Bruce and be in Bruce's best interest, but there'll probably be 3 different ways that, learning teams will take to get there. So learning teams. Whoa, what a transition, right? So your learning teams were posted on Friday. If you haven't already gone in and shared your contact information, please do that so people can get a hold of you, and you can decide how you're going to communicate, whether it be like a Google Doc or something like that, to assemble your plan for Bruce. And then that's due in about a month. So you have plenty of time to do that. 4 people per team, 3 teams. So, again, learning teams, share your information, and then you're kind of working outside of class, not really working within that thread, but, however you want to do it, that's fine. Again, thank you for sharing your insights. I am going to take, if you're posting some documents, I'll probably take those and repost those up into the resources section so they're a little easier for people to find. And, if they're underneath your name in a thread, they might get lost a little bit. So I've got Priscilla, you had one document of where the Madison Metropolitan School District had kind of put together a parent-friendly description of the IP process. So that I'm going to take and put up into resource sharing. So thank you. The posts have been very intriguing for me because we have small districts, Cassville, 200 students, K-12, large districts, Madison. So we have a lot of flavor, a lot of perspective on how the needs of students are met when it comes to pupil services and non-discrimination. And I think that, one of the topics that's going to be kind of consistent throughout the class will be meeting like mental health needs, because that is a rapidly expanding area, and it does intersect with bullying, with harassment, with threat input systems, harm to self, harm to others. So a lot of things that come into the non-discrimination part does come out of that. But I mean, that won't be, of course, exclusive what we'll talk about, but that definitely will be part of what we'll have coming in. It started to come out already in some of your posts of saying, we're a smaller district, and we have a lot of turnover in outside parties either providing these services in our schools, or parents have to drive like 90 minutes, or that we're a bigger district and we have these processes internalized, where we have providers already on site and a pretty robust referral process and things like that. So, but something you want to be aware of, just because it is trending so much in an upward pattern for the last few years, and it only looks like it's going to continue. And I posed a few interesting questions, when you came up with your populations for your district, your population breakdown of students with disabilities. The trend I've seen, and I would say other people that I know who've looked at this have seen a kind of a surge in OHI, other health impaired, and students with ADHD, depression, anxiety, being identified under OHI criteria, and those numbers are tending to go up. Not this isn't a blanket statement, but seeing like if a student comes in and they're identified as having a severe anxiety disorder, what do you do? So that's something where are you qualifying under OHI? Is it 504? You're just taking that medical plan and following what the medical plan is? Is there something else that you're doing in the district? So very interesting, because again, these are different everywhere that you go. So again, I want to again thank you so much for being active posters. Right from the start, that first day, people jumped in, and it's continued. So yes, keep your post. So you need to respond to each discussion question. So those are discussion question 1 and 2. They both are due on Thursdays. So you have those, and then 8 other additional posts, which can be people who have responded to the discussion questions. You can build off of those, respond to them, or you could respond, to the Fireside chat. You could, usually I post a couple threads, but that you're doing your 2 required, discussion threads, and then you are doing 8 additional posts. So 10 posts total. And, these don't need to be any longer than, a paragraph, or they can even be, a little bit shorter if you're doing that too. So, but I want the threads to keep building, and that you add new perspectives to the threads. Maybe you can see the style that I've used, and I like, some of you are using styles too, or you're copying. You're saying like somebody else, made this statement, and I'm going to add this to it because I experienced this, or I want to learn more about this. Like, how did you exactly accomplish this? So, and anything you can do, if you can frame it back to through the lens of like non-discrimination, through the lens of non-discrimination. So, I think that's, and I'm going to work harder on that too. So let us start with our shout outs. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Priscilla, thank you for sharing that document from the Madison Metropolitan School District that demystified the IP process for parents. So that's awesome. I believe everybody in class will gain benefit from that. It is, again, I'll put it under the resources tab, which will be under announcements. You'll find it. You also talked a lot about, in the first week, extensive efforts to keep lines of communication open with parents. and to encourage parents to ask you questions. So if they're unsure of like, the IEP or some services that their child is receiving, or just some question that it's like, ask me the question, and I'll find an answer for you if I don't have one. By doing that, you're building trust. And the other part of it is that usually it's something small that comes up, and somebody doesn't ask for a clarification. And it can be a teacher, it could be another teacher, something with happening in the IEP. Well, I didn't know that this was supposed to be, read to the student, or something like that. Or something with grading, could be whatever. But when you have this environment where you're just, you're welcoming the questions, you're saying, please ask the questions. People will ask the questions, and that diffuses that misunderstanding, like right away. So usually when I found, this isn't new. I mean, anybody listening, but usually it's when people are like fearful of something, or saying like, oh, I don't want to do that, or, I'm apprehensive, or throwing up some roadblocks. It's because there's a lack of information. It's a lack of knowledge. So they kind of default back to a position of I'm not sure. I'm comfortable with where I'm at. I don't want to, do anything different until like I know more about this. So it really is keeping that line of communication open. And again, I think you did a wonderful job, encouraging people to say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you help me to understand this? So that's big. It's big, Priscilla. So I really appreciate that. All right. Brianna, you shared many examples of building relationships with community, businesses, and organizations to promote work experiences. Some paid, which is great for students ages 18 through 21. So well done. And I could feel the work that you were putting into that, with meeting with community members and showcasing what students are capable of. And once that word got out there, that then more people would ripple that word throughout the community. So I'm going to go back to an experience that I had when I was new to teaching. So, we're talking 20 years ago, something like that, and I was in a district, K-12 district of maybe like 700 kids, K-12, a community about 1,500 people, rural, but not too far away from some larger areas. And I co-taught a transition course with a lady named Ruth, a high school teacher, and she had a degree also in voc ed. Ruth was awesome. So Ruth had taught this class for a number of years. I think there were 5-6 students, all but one, I believe, I also served on my caseload. So that was the tie-in with me teaching this with Ruth. And we would go over things, of course, like, how to identify your strength areas, how to put together a resume, how to verbally, present yourself and talk to people, how to set up and maintain a schedule, all of these work type things. And of course I would focus more on the communication aspects of those. So she had many locations throughout this small community where students were placed, and, probably like half of them were paid placements, and it was pretty amazing. So I asked her, I'm like, Ruth, how did this happen? And she said, Dave, like when I started in this position 4 or 5 years ago, there were maybe 2 or 3 sites in our town here that would accept students, from the high school, in the 18 to 21-year-old program. And mostly it was like volunteer work, and it was kind of short term. So what I did is I went out and I just kept driving around the community and looking for different businesses, and I would write down the names, and then I would go in and ask, like, what do you do here? And eventually went in and said, could I bring in a couple students for a tour? So from that, she cultivated about 6 to 8 very reliable sites. One actually was the bowling alley in town. And there was a boy who lived a couple blocks away from the bowling alley. He was also in Special Olympics in bowling, by the way. And got a job working at the bowling alley, paid job, and then the owner actually let him bowl for free, like after school, not during school, but like after school or on weekends. So he could get practice for Special Olympics. And by the way, the kid was lights out awesome. I think he had like a 180 average or something like that. Dominated through Special Olympics. But yeah, so it was one of those things where she was finding her work experiences through actually going out and doing kind of this drive around. And as you said, I think the barrier or it wasn't discrimination. It wasn't, like a community that was closed off to students with disabilities, but it was a community that just didn't know that these students necessarily were in this 18 and 21-year-old program. So Ruth did a great job of introducing, people to these students and saying, this is our community. These are our kids. So, let's work on skills for, jobs and to, participate in the various, rec opportunities that the community has, and very successful. So, very much appreciate that. I'm also going to add, I've known schools that have put together school-based enterprises. One was, just recently a school put together where they took newspapers and paper bags and chopped them up and somehow had this process and then compacted them basically into small fire starter bricks and then packaged them up inside of like newspaper and sold them at like school functions. And that went really, really well. So, some of those things can be done too. And sometimes schools will hire students. I see that, of course, as both a positive, but it can be one of these things where you don't want your school to become the perpetual employer of students. I mean, of course, you want to cultivate that out to the community. Early, again, in my career, there was a student who was volunteering in a kitchen. I think he was paid actually in the school kitchen. And when he got to be 21, the parents just thought he would continue to work in the school kitchen. And they were quite upset when, he turned 21 and exited out of school and then that job stopped. So they never knew and we never communicated clearly that would end. So thank you. And Donna, in a response to Dale, you wrote, in your district, we have tried to strengthen our counseling supports by contracting with an outside agency to provide additional supports to students and families on site, so in your district. However, since the contract began at the beginning of last school year, there was rollover twice with their staff, and we currently are waiting for a third counselor. So this becomes a big struggle in providing for mental health needs, and also in some districts like, autism services, because there is a lot of turnover in staff, So in regard to other mental health needs, there's a healthcare center. Again, I'm not naming some of this because it's going to be, out on the internet, but this healthcare center found another crisis worker. So we have one in York County now. There was a period of time when there wasn't one. So it would take over 3 hours to get someone to evaluate a student. The other unfortunate thing is that in the county, students and families do not have access to the level of services or sometimes limited services for mental health supports or even AODA supports. So, the challenge of geography, it comes into play big, when you're a student services director. And it's much different being in, Dane County or the Fox Valley or Eau Claire versus, or even Hudson, because I know, Hudson does some stuff, across the bridge into Minnesota that they do some co-op services. But, if you're in a place that's more rural, it's really hard. It's really hard. So this turnover factor comes into play. So a few things. One is, first, thank you for being very open in sharing this. You mentioned providing services on site. There's many benefits to that. And one is you just cut down the windshield time. A parent, if they have to take a child out of school to work with a mental health, professional, and it's a 90-minute drive, one way, and then, they have the session, have to eat, and then they drive back. Well, it's probably the day, right? And then it's also not an inclusive setting. So you've worked to have this inclusive setting for the provision of services and to increase the amount of educational time available to the student. So they're not losing it to windshield time. So my question is, how were those services paid for? Is the school paying for those? Is the county paying for those? Is it private insurance? Is it Medicaid? Do you have a package where you offer so many sessions? I've seen that done, 5 or 8 sessions. Also, what type of screeners are you using? I'm just curious on this because I've seen this done in so many different ways. I worked with a district that had in-house grant-funded services, and this wasn't long ago, within the last couple of years. The way that the district prioritized students for services was through the building principal. So there really wasn't like a screener or an assessment, and that gets tricky because what does a mental health assessment look like when it is administered by school staff? Again, unless you're hiring mental health clinicians to come into the school that has specific training. But so anyway, this district had a grant, and it was the principals that were getting together and basically kind of identifying the kids that they felt would benefit from services. And there wasn't anything really more complicated than that. So the principals would get together and they would say, like, here are my top 5 students. Here's my top 5, and they might have 7 slots open. So they had to kind of say, worst is first. Who's manifesting, with the most intense needs, and some of that, of course, is objective. So kind of put principal against principal, and there really wasn't a great objective way to talk about this because it was kind of like the perception of the principal, or maybe the principal and the counselor. And you also had this thing where a parent might say, no, like, you offer the service and say, this is available to your child and also available to you. And the parent said, I don't want to partake in it. No. And then you still have the child manifesting with these needs. So what do you do? Donna, you bring up a great point. And I think, what I pull out of this too is, students and families move all over the state all the time. So they can move into your district, maybe from a district where they didn't have the services that your district has. So that's something totally new to the parents. Or, they move into your district and they're like, well, my previous district provided this to us and this to us and this. And you're like, well, we don't have that. Here's how we are going to be able to meet the needs because we don't have an on-site mental health counselor, which you had in your previous district. So I think that's where the awareness comes in of how this is so different across the whole state, and how counties fund and step into this and support it. And in other counties, they'll say, we don't have the dollars to do it. And where United Way steps in, like in the Fox Valley, very strong, Kaukauna, Kimberly, and in those areas. But, in some places, again, that just doesn't exist. So, you bring up some really great points. I'd like to hear more about this because as I'm reading this too, I'm thinking, this not only gets into mental health, but this gets into what is also available for bullying and harassment prevention. What kind of like threat input system, or if there's a threat assessment, like a student is saying they might bring harm to themselves, like what does that look like? So I appreciate that, Donna. And Dale, this is our 4th shout out of week 2. Dale, in response to week 2 discussion question 2, you wrote, I think we dropped the ball when it comes to other staff in our building and definitely substitutes. So this is like educating them of what the needs of students are. Just this past week, I was working with our staff member that works in our sensory and reflection room. I was asking him about a student I noticed in our data that was seeing him regularly, who also has an IEP with a primary disability of EBD. this staff member had no idea that the student had an IEP. All I could ask myself was, how could this happen? This kid has goals to work on, self-regulation, and our staff member in our school's room that works on this does not know what this kid's goals are. Let's just say I sat down with him and our assistant principal last Friday to review all students who have IEPs in our building and if they have goals related to self-regulation. So that's a great point, Dale. And I think this happens a lot. I think it happens a lot. Here's what I tend to see. So schools will get together their professional development for the start of the year, and whether it be the nonviolent crisis intervention training, sensory trauma-informed care, and that happens kind of in a flurry in those fall in-services. And then after that, there really isn't a solid induction process in a number of schools for staff who are hired after the first of the year. So, I mean, I think so that sometimes plays into this. And the other part is, maybe the person that was in that room wasn't required to participate in that training, and there wasn't documentation, that person did receive the training, or if they weren't there, that they received some sort of follow-up. So what you talk about right here, like this, this would be something I would receive as a statement for an expert witness opportunity, I guess. And I received one just a few days ago that wasn't too far off from kind of what you've shared here. And again, it's a different state. I don't do anything in Wisconsin in that regard. But it was something to the fact of staff being hired and not being aware of the student's IEP and the IEP goals, and for months, and something then pretty significant would happen with the student that would have a negative outcome. And then the question was, well, whose job was it to make people aware of the IEP and all of that. So I think you've done a great job here. And now what you need to do, as a student services director, is to have that on your checklist for the start of the year, of making sure that, staff that are in the sensory, rooms that are helping students with self-regulation, that they are aware of IEPs, that you go through, that checklist in the building, or work on with the principal. So they go through that checklist of making sure that those staff have access and understand, so they can carry out those IEPs. So, let me see. Oh, here's something else. I've also seen the tendency for schools to assign, this is bird walking a little bit, but to assign the most challenging students as far as like the depth of need. Okay. Doesn't mean like they're not great kids to work with, but kids who have really complex needs, it takes you a while to understand what the needs are, and how to recognize the antecedents and build up rapport with the student. But I've seen a tendency for schools to assign the most challenging students to freshly hired staff, whether it be teachers or aides. So, you get someone who really doesn't understand the depth of needs of the students. Again, the antecedents, the behavior intervention plan, the behavior support plan. And it's like, well, you also described, some potential life, death matters, things, here, Dale, because, what if it's a student who is also has type 1 diabetes? Or, some comorbid condition, such as a seizure disorder, things like that, or even a student that wanders. I worked with somebody who had a search and rescue dog. Actually did an interview on my podcast about a year ago, and would be called out, and frequently was called out for children with autism that wandered, whether it be from home or from school. And then I also worked on a podcast with someone who had been in the capacity of a commercial drone operator, does that right now, did not do this himself, but knew another drone operator who was called out with his drone to search for a lost child, and did find that child within like an hour and safe. But, these are things too, like that information needs to be communicated. So sometimes districts will be cautious on that, like really cautious. They'll be like, well, if we have a substitute teacher that comes in, or a long-term sub or whatever, we don't want everybody to know like that this child has a peanut allergy because then it could stigmatize the child. So I understand that. Like, I get that. The other part of that, though, is I've seen districts that have been very overt, like on the subfolder, and there's a big neon sticker and it says, there is a student in your class with a peanut allergy, and you open it up and there's a picture, and the picture could be, this is Billy, and here's Billy. So you actually have the face. I mean, this is a sub, so the best way is going to have like that photo right there. This is Billy has a peanut allergy, like peanuts can't be near him. If any peanuts are near him, there's an EpiPen, like located in the, top right drawer of the desk or whatever, and immediately, administer the EpiPen and call the office, or, whatever the protocol is. But people that don't have that awareness, so bringing that awareness to them. So, yeah, it's incredible. So, the other part is, we talk about this induction process. We need an induction process for when people are hired after the first of the year. So we can videotape our trainings right now, which is great. And you can put them up on, into a drive, and you can also set up like a Google competency, like a little quiz people can take. And then if you have questions, talk to this person or this person. So I think that's something you need to do also as a student services director is, how are we training staff? And I have a very large cat to the right of me right here. How are we training staff who, no cat, do not pull at that chair. Okay, big guy here. All right. How are we training staff who are joining the district after the year has already started? So let's get into our week 2. Dun, 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 reflective teaching annotation. All right, I've got my notes here. 504 idea, ADA, and allergies. This gets into, kind of a build off with our allergy case study with Bruce. So again, districts are going to handle 504 idea, ADA, kind of how all of those come together. Districts are going to handle that differently, that intersection, that nexus. And of course, that's fine. That's fine. So a few things. One is, if you have idea, you get some money from the feds for that. So that is something sometimes, superintendents and school boards will, want you to consider if the student does qualify, under IDEA, because you do get some funding for that. If you qualify under 504, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, there are no additional dollars coming to your district. Just as a point of making that, I'm sure your business managers are aware of that. The thing is, know who's in charge of 504s in your buildings, because if OCR comes on site, and this happened in Wisconsin to a friend of mine that's a director a few years ago, there was an OCR complaint, and it had to do with a 504 plan. Parent, was made a complaint about a 504 plan. OCR came in and went to the building and wanted to know who was in charge. And, I think it was the counselor was in charge, but that wanted to see actually the 504 plans, and then wanted to see 504 plans from other buildings. See, this is one of the things when you get into like something that's through OCR, Office of Civil Rights. It's not only that they can come in and pull this one file or look at this 504 plan or whatever. They can also they can say, we want to look at 5 others. So it's much different than if there's something that you're working on with the DPI, for example. So I'll be completely honest in this. I've always found 504 to be somewhat murky. I don't believe I'm alone in that. Maybe I am, but the directors I know in the field and have known for a long time, we've always felt it's kind of a murky area. So that's something I would say, have an understanding of what your 504 plans are, where they're kept, and how they're updated. Because again, it's not like an IEP process, and the invites and everything is it's different. So you can standardize that out. There's forms that you can purchase, and I think it makes sense to have probably like your school attorney look through those every once in a while, just to anything changed here on a federal level that we need to be aware of. And of course, you go to conferences and things like that, there'll be some updates on that too. But I'm going to move us down a little bit more on our first page here for week 2 annotation, and comfort animals versus service animals. So there's a big difference in this, and you but you should have a policy regarding service animals in your schools, like what your requirement is for documentation and understanding, that there is a strong protection under ADA for service animals. Now, I think that starts to get fuzzy sometimes when parents will say, well, here's a comfort animal. Maybe it could be a rabbit or something like that, and my child has autism, and this is very calming for them, so we want it to come to school. So then it's a discussion of, well, is this a service animal or is this a comfort animal? So again, this is something I think it's worth your time to work with your administrative team and run this past your legal counsel. There are policies that are out there, but the time to create a policy isn't after this, like, all of a sudden comes to you in your district. Let's say this hasn't come to you before, and someone says, we do have, let's say it is a rabbit and it's a child with autism, and we have a doctor's order that says, the child is more regulated, calm, feels more comfortable in environments when this rabbit is present. So then, if you don't have a policy already in place regarding service animals and comfort animals, you kind of have to scramble with that. And you always want to, of course, act in the best interest of the child and be fair, but there needs to be some procedure that is very defined for this. And I do know, a district that kind of got caught off guard on that. And I made that comment about Rudy the Rooster. And actually, that wasn't in jest. That was actually, like a chick, or a small chicken or something like that. That was, I think it was a kindergarten student. And the parent wanted that to come to school, with the student like half days, and I think was pretty easy going, when the district said no. But then, if that would have been pushed a little bit, it's like, how do you respond to that? Or, what is the comfort animal really accomplishing? And so what can you replace that with to get that outcome? So these are the types of things that can get really complicated really fast if you, again, aren't thinking ahead and getting some kind of policy. And again, these policies exist in districts. So one of the greatest things is to borrow. You're making friends in this class, you're networking. And I would do that all the time. I would borrow from other districts, and I would borrow stuff that we had out, and I would make the board and superintendent aware of it. And, because we might invest so much in our attorney fees to update our release of information, and then we would have an area directors meeting, and I would make it available to others, that they could just put their information, in the Word document. It could be theirs. But then in turn, I knew at some point I would get something back from them. Like they would have some kind of document that they had invested time in, that then I would have access to. So we reciprocate it very well as a group of directors. So on page 2, it's not numbered, but we get into a statement here: be careful of creating new policies or requirements, as once a policy is implemented, rarely are such ever reversed. The caution I have there is just not to be so descriptive in policy that it limits what your principal or your leader is able to do at the building level, or you as a student services director. You have to be able to use discretion. So, it's like the zero tolerance policy where, if a kindergarten student, makes a drawing of a stick figure and it looks like a gun, but it's like, really, Spider-Man, shooting, some spider web thing or whatever. But no, it's like, this is, too close to somebody with a gun. So all of a sudden the kid is out 3 days, and there wasn't any discretion because you have a policy that says, if anything looks like whatever this, it's like the policy should be pretty broad. And then your administrative processes, like what's in the handbook and things like that, and the discretion afforded to your administrators gets to be I need this cat to kind of stay over here. He usually doesn't come up here. So here, buddy. There you go. All right. So just to keep an eye on that as you go through policies in your district and policies that you will be responsible to enforce. A lot of times it is the student services director, pupil services director, who is investigating claims of harassment. So that can, also be done by the building principal, but sometimes that moves up to a level where, if it's due to, race or religion, then the director of student services gets involved and does additional interviews and makes determinations. Was this discrimination based upon one of those categories? So talking about policies, hey, plan to review your policies every 5 to 7 years. Again, most people do this, but not everybody. And I have seen policies in Wisconsin that have to do with bullying and harassment. And the last time the policy was reviewed or updated was 20 years ago. And that's completely what happens is boards turn over, or else people review policies, but then they don't note on the policy itself. The board doesn't note that it was reviewed on a certain date. This is a very nice cat, by the way. It is a cat that was returned to the Humane Society a year old. He's a big guy, big cat. And then we adopted him. So he's super nice, hanging out down here, wanting to be a part of this. So, yeah. Anyway, where I was going with that is that's really defeating if you have policies with harassment and bullying and non-discrimination that aren't up to date. When I say up to date, like in the last 5 to 7 years, it's very reasonable. But it's all of a sudden, like I said, this one district, they didn't have anything in about social media, because when the policy was last updated, it was prior to social media. So I get into HIPAA a little bit, and we have so many students with medical reports now that you ask for the medical report get a release of information, and the medical report comes from the doctor or the outside provider. That's, I think, the best way to do it. You can also have the parent give you a copy, which is okay. What you don't know, though, is if the parent has edited that version at all. And I did, again, have that happen in a district where the parent provided the report, but there were sections that were kind of whited out. And so the district had to go with what they had in the report, but it wasn't what they would have gotten had they worked directly with the physician, but the parent wasn't allowing that release of information. So that was hard. But I always ask to get it directly from the physician and not from the parent. But I mean, if you can get it, the only way you can get it from the parent, then that's the only way that you can get it. But yeah, don't re-release medical reports. And if those come to you in student records, you really shouldn't have those. If they're coming from another district, student moves in, you should be identifying, where those came from, and then talk to the parent and get new releases and have those re-released to you, because they are only released to that district. They do not go along. The exception to that is the parent can take, they can take the file. The school can say, here's all of the medical, documents that were released to us, and here you are, parent. It's up to you if you want to give these to the next district. But then again, you're getting those from a parent, and just how complete are those versus, possibly being somewhat edited. Not saying, parents are trying to be deceitful, but just saying there might also be documents in there where they're like, well, this is old, or this was the one doctor that we only went to once, so we're going to get rid of this. But let us move on. Dun, 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 dun. All right. So we get into money. Money is not the cure. People saying, we need more programs and things like that. So actually, there's an article once we get into class a little bit. There's a couple articles. One is I wrote one when I helped develop the Sauk County Consortium of Districts which existed for an amount of time. And then also there was an article came out a year ago in School Business Affairs International magazine. I wrote the feature for the magazine, and then there was another article about co-oping and sharing services with other districts, special ed services, so you can kind of pool your resources. So I think that's a great way to, again, not necessarily spend a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that you can access that are, if you can share resources, if, for example, there's trainings like right now, FEMA has wonderful trainings. You'll have one that you'll take in this class, ICS 100, I believe, Instant Command System, but there are numerous trainings on, like youth with disabilities and in cases of disaster and stuff. And I'll share out some links and you can find some of those once you hit that FEMA site. But you have some trainings that are out there in understanding discrimination, stuff like that are done by FEMA, done by other government agencies, and they're really, really good. And they're really good. And stuff on the DPI site, really, really good. But people aren't aware of these and they don't use them. So, just putting that out there. Oh, here we go. Last on that. So your release of information, I suggest from experience that once, you have your release of information, have a sample that's completed. Okay. And take both of those and put them on your website, because how many times does it happen when you're at a meeting or something comes up with a parent in a discussion and you need that release of information and it's like, where exactly is it, or who has a copy of it, or it's on the Z drive or whatever. It's like, you can make that transparent. I mean, it doesn't have any identifying information. So you can have that, plus like have one that's filled out as an example. So then you can go right in, you can quickly log in and you can get one printed off like at an IEP meeting and boom, you can get it to the parent. So it's one of those things where in the moment, I think it can be hard to locate those when you need to get your hands on those. And it's one of those things too, where you can, of course you have your part that you can provide ahead of time. But you can even access that if you're with a parent at a discharge meeting, from a medical center or something like that. Like you could hop online if you needed a release, so you could get a report, a discharge report or something like that. But it's a good thing to put those online. I don't see those on websites a lot. Some districts do those, but I think that's a good thing, is to put your blank one on your district website and then like an example of one filled out. Obviously, with fake information. So, and, talking about the fact of gifted learners, need development of social skills. Again, that's a generalization, but I think it just goes into the point where PBIS, positive behavioral intervention support, that's for everybody. That's for all of our students. And how many times do we think of it, we think of it, oh, these are for students who need to learn and understand the school expectations. Well, no, it's for all students. I mean, it's for all students of what our expectations are to be citizens, to be role models, to live and foster our great society. So that's where I think PBIS sometimes gets described as a program to help kids who are struggling in school to understand the school expectations and come up to that standard, when really, again, it's a design, to help all students with understanding, I think, societal expectations. Because, I mean, there's a lot of expectations that come into being, a citizen, and also a global citizen, and what that means. So, okay. I am on the last page. Make sure that you explain or demonstrate bullying and harassment to students with special needs, along with how to report such behavior through the school's threat reporting system. A 2-page alleged bullying instant complaint form will be a barrier for a student with a learning disability in reading. For students that have been recipients of bullying or harassment acts, it is fully appropriate to include an IEP goal that addresses that the student will learn to define bullying and harassment behavior, as well as how to report such bullying or how to report such behavior through the school's threat input system. So I haven't seen this in IEPs. I haven't seen this written into IEPs, but actually there is a state that I'm working with, an entire state, that wants to put this together in a addendum document that would go out, and it would then go to all of the districts in the state saying, if you have students with disabilities or English language learners, well, let's just say students with disabilities right now, we want to make sure that the students with disabilities, especially, disabilities that could be impacting, reading and comprehension, we want to make sure that we are doing more to make students aware of what bullying and harassment is, so they can describe it, they can identify it, they can perceive it. And it's like the student that is brushed up against in a hallway during a passing time and thinks that was an act of bullying, when really it wasn't. I mean, it was a busy hallway. But also students who are genuinely being bullied or seeing bullying and not using or understanding what it is in the terminology to report it. So practicing on that. And I think that also comes in huge into transition planning for students with disabilities, probably more mild to moderate cognitive disabilities as they get older, so they can report on things. A big thing right now is grooming. That is, grooming is huge in West Coast counseling curriculums, teaching kids to identify the signs of grooming, which are very difficult to pick up on. I'll actually be doing a podcast with an expert in that area, and I'm doing some professional development for a major district based upon some research studies done by a consortium. But one of the questions, get this, one of the questions, that you would ask is like, do you have a lot of friends online? And okay, are they adult friends? And I mean, so I actually have like there's kind of like a set of 4 questions, and then there's ways to teach students with disabilities. Remember, I talked about that, that register of, we don't want to put words out there that are going to be 12th grade level. We want to kind of get it down to that 7th grade level, or maybe even, because you're saying like, does this make you feel uncomfortable? That's subjective. That's hard to describe. So, but I'll share more of that once we get into class. And actually, once I get that document up and get that podcast done, which will be in February, I'll make sure to share that with people. And I'll actually ask the district if I can share that document with everybody, so you've got it. But so what I'm trying to get at right here is, you have the student handbook, right? So you have the student handbook, and how well the students really understand what's in the handbook. Because when I was in school, but we would get the handbook, and we'd all be in the auditorium, and there would be a little 5-minute talk about it, and then not really time to ask questions. You'd have to sign the last page saying, I received the handbook and I am responsible for everything in the handbook. And you had to then rip it out, put it in a box as you left. And I think you were supposed to take another sheet and have your parent or guardian sign it and turn that in. Although like very few people did, and the district never checked if that was submitted or not. So that's all passive. So, I mean, who really understands and who really does that? But here, if you're actually, with helping students through the IEP who might have reported that they have been the recipient of bullying or harassment, or have had struggles with, issues of getting along with peers and peer relationships. If you're putting that into IEP goals, I think that's very appropriate to work its way. And also that you understand the threat input system, the threat reporting system. Is it tell an adult? Is it to use an online type system? How does that exactly work? So, that is also assumed a lot, and it's not explicit. It needs to be explicit. Kids need to know how to access the systems. I think this is where I go off on a soapbox a little bit, because when the government came out, I did, again, a podcast on this maybe 3 weeks ago, but the government came out, the Army and Homeland Security, I believe, teamed up with a active shooter video game based virtual reality type thing to train teachers, to help teachers become more aware of how to respond during an active shooter situation. whether they be the teacher or you could play the role of the, again, friendly cat here, of the student or, whatever. So not that is like innately bad. The thing is though, and I think it was like $6 million spent on that. You need to look at threat detection, identifying, because in almost all instances where a student has been, brought harm to self or others, people have known ahead of time about this. Whether it be post on social media, whether it be telling people, like in Bethel, Alaska, for example. Now, not that this is going to happen, but there was a school shooting, 1997 in Bethel, Alaska. And there were, I believe, 24 kids on a mezzanine waiting for the school shooting to happen because they knew that this boy had said he was going to do it. And actually a couple other students showed him how to load this gun. It was like a shotgun. He had never used a gun before. And one kid even brought a camera. So you had all of these kids, but then nobody reported it. So again, I think we need to make sure we're putting a lot of emphasis into our threat detection and helping kids identify what doesn't seem right on social media, what doesn't seem right that this student is saying, or, I'm starting to see some scratches or, I am seeing some harassing type messages that they've been, texting to me or texting to somebody else or something like that. So yeah, we need to put a lot of time up front because those signs are typically there. And if we can do a better job detecting those, then we're ahead of the game. We're way ahead of the game. So, always be vigilant with students with allergies. I'm getting down to my second to last bullet point. A student who had for years a mild allergy to fish could unexpectedly have a severe reaction and next time they encountered fish. So, districts handle this again differently. You'll have to be aware of this right away. This is one of the things that as a director of student services, you can't wait until Allergy Awareness Month, which I believe is April. It's just crazy. It should be like October. Think about it, because how many 55 million kids go to school, K-12. So we should have Allergy Awareness Month in October. What we did as a district is we just celebrated it, or recognized it in October, and did all of our allergy awareness activities specific to the month in October, because then, of course, we're at the start of the year versus April. But anyway, again, I've seen it done in different ways. I have seen staff take the student, now we're talking more or less, a student at a very early elementary level, to meet the cooks and say, hey, here's whoever, and they have this allergy. So then they have that face-to-face relationship, and they can recognize when they go through the line, usually in the system, when the student punches in their number or whatever, and it comes up in the system, Skyward or Infinite Campus, whatever it is, it'll immediately like flash and say there's a, allergy alert or whatever. But if it doesn't, that the cooks recognize and they're like, oh, we don't give eggs to, Carol because, she has an egg allergy. So, that they recognize that. And then also, that they're trained in the use of EpiPen and to recognize, if a student goes into shock, because, and people who work in the kitchen, that they can do that. But so it's like one of these things where, again, people might say, well, I don't want a picture of Carol, I don't want Carol to meet with the kitchen staff because then that's kind of singling her out. Or I don't want a picture of Carol behind where only the cooks can see it when they're serving, and underneath it says, like egg allergy or something, like a couple of those, just as a reminder, because what if there's a substitute cook that day or something like that, and just say, hey, this is just an extra step that we have. So it gets into kind of this area where you have to make a judgment call as a director. What do you feel comfortable with? Now, the other thing, you might run this past legal counsel, for example. You're legal. Your attorney might say, no, absolutely don't do that. Or your attorney might say, you could, but, here's reasons to do it. Here's reasons not to do it. Legal counsel, if you're not aware of this already, if you ask 5 lawyers for opinions, they're going to differ because, lawyers will take different positions and they'll research different cases and I've yet to have a lawyer give me probably a definitive, like, here's exactly what you should do versus like, here are like 2 or 3 options and here's what would happen if this happened and you did this option versus this option versus this option. So ultimately, though, it comes down to you. Like, there's been times when I've looked at the recommendations of the lawyer and I've said, nope, we're not doing it. Because here was one. This was an authentic case where we had a parent who had a boy with bee sting allergy, and the parent wanted aid to ride on the school bus with the child. So the aide could observe this child in case the child was stung by a bee on the bus. And, we looked at that and thought that was unreasonable because, the likelihood of that happening was pretty low versus like the student could be stung virtually anywhere by a bee. That we did have a process in place where the bus driver, would identify any health concerns, and then they called 911. That was their process. I did lobby hard to have the bus drivers administer an EpiPen, but that wasn't part of the bus agreement. We had a third-party bus contract, so what they did is they called 911. But again, the buses now, you always know where the buses are, through GPS systems. So that's one thing too is like EMS. They can identify where the buses are, get to them really fast. But anyway, our attorney in this case said to me, well, David, I researched, and there was a case down in Georgia where like a bee flew on a bus and stung a kid, and the kid had a reaction, and they didn't get to whatever the hospital in time, and there were some permanent neurological damages to the child. So based upon like that case, and the district ended up making a settlement and all of that, and I'm like you're always going to find like that case, right? You're always going to find that, and I just because if we would have done it there, we would have had to ripple effect and probably do that out across multiple buses. And again, it's one of these things where I knew a district also in Wisconsin. I knew a district in Wisconsin that banned peanuts from the school. Okay. Now there are times when, you might have a student with such a severe reaction when maybe that's the way that you have to go. But then, if you ban, you have to have some way to absolutely ensure that ban. Meaning, like if you had a basketball game the night before and somebody brought a peanut butter sandwich into a game and part of it was on a bleacher, and the next day the kid is in gym and comes in contact with the bleachers or, the handles to the gym, and there's peanut butter residue, you can be liable because you've said our board policy says peanuts are banned from this school. And in this district, once they pass that policy, they want it then to backtrack and come up with a more reasonable policy of saying we're a peanut aware school. We will, put signage up. We'll educate people, as through newsletters and other things. We're going to, monitor our lunchroom tables. So like if we do have a table where we have a student that does have a allergy, their friends can sit with them, but first, we will check their meals to make sure, like, if they bring any cold lunch or anything that they've obtained, they don't have peanuts, things like that. So, but just want to make you very aware of things like that as a director too, of understanding, working with your legal counsel. Different districts will do this to a different extent because it is costly. There will be times though when you'll want to sit down with your superintendent and say, I think we should get a consult on this. I'm not, I want to obtain the perspective of our legal counsel in this situation. So let's see. Be careful with banning anything from schools because, pretty soon, you could ban, peanuts, latex, you could ban clay. Now there's milk allergy, seafood. So if you get into this language of banning, this is again where the question is, how do you what measures are you put in place? In a reasonable measure, if you're banning, would be to have, that you're checking students as they're coming in the door, right? But do you have the staff to do that? But wouldn't that be reasonable? Like in a court of law, wouldn't that be reasonable? Wouldn't that be considered reasonable if you're saying like we absolutely ban this from being in the building because we know it can present a safety risk? And again, if you're talking elementaries, it's not like students are going to have the cognition to know that they shouldn't be bringing in a peanut butter sandwich they made for themselves because mom and dad were already off to work and nobody made a lunch for them. So they just made this for themselves and brought it in, or, himself or herself. So, can you hold that student responsible then? So let me go through one more thing. Okay. EpiPens, EpiPens now, when I first got into, student services director role, it's pretty rare to have an EpiPen even in a school. And now they're pretty ubiquitous. I mean, they're in most schools. If you don't have them, if you go to like your local pharmacy, they'll typically donate them. Or if you go to your insurance provider for your school, like it was GHC or Dean or whatever, and say, we would like you to donate EpiPens for the safety of our students. I've found that they typically do that without any question. Or if you do have to go through like the Lions Club or something like that to get EpiPens. And they do expire, like I think about 12 months or so, and you can use the expired ones to train staff, like you stab an orange or something, shoot it up with epinephrine. Orange gets all crazy, runs off. But yeah, so I think that's something you can do. And while we're at it, before I forget, this really probably doesn't have to do anything with the topic, but I didn't learn until after I'd been on the job for a couple of years that our nursing department was responsible for maintaining the AEDs, and the pads and the batteries, again, only last so long. So that, you have to check those and document that you've checked those, and then also make sure that you're replacing those. Some districts, that's kind of buildings and grounds that takes care of that, and that's a buildings and grounds requirement. Other districts, it falls to nursing. Again, but what if you have one nurse? And in fall, I mean, it's absolutely crazy with immunizations and all the paperwork that nurses need to do and to submit to the counties and get back and forth. So, again, some way that is monitored. It serves you well to take like a notebook and just jot down these things as they come to your mind of like, I'm not sure like who our 504 coordinator is at this building, or I'm not exactly sure how we're training substitute staff on what an IEP is and where to look for it or whatever. And you start making these little notes, and then the more you do the job, you get systems together for those. Because, I mean, once you have induction systems of training staff hired, like mid-year on what an IEP is, you can use that time and time again. So it's things like that. So documentation is if when you write down things, you're taking notes, that's documentation. When you act upon that, so let's say I need to at our next special ed meeting with the special ed staff, I'm going to talk about students with disabilities and going through the handbook to ask if they have questions about, whether it be harassment or bullying or other areas of the handbook that, you deem are relevant, attendance, things like that. So I want to talk about this, to make sure that staff do this. And then once you know that your staff have done that, you can check that off. Like you make a little note saying, yeah, Steph followed up with me. They sent an email, or, I called them and I know that they did this, or like this was something my, counselors were going to do like this week. So once it's done, once you check that off, that becomes a record. So there's a difference between documentation and record. So that record is more or less saying like, this has been completed. So this is, we have this, or like once that if an IEP is developed and for some reason, the IEP team does want to put a goal in there, where the student will be able to identify what harassment is or bullying, whether they're watching it like being acted out in a social story or whatever means it is. So, the record then is that IEP that goal actually gets generated. So, but there is a difference. Again, a document and a record are two different things. So just that you have that clear. I am really, again, appreciative. And I posted this in this week. I just posted it today, and it has like introspective, and then like, wanting to please. And there's the 4 quadrants. I don't have it up right now, but basically to kind of know where you are situated right now as someone either in this role or like, approaching this role. Are you introspective? Are you, that because here's the thing. Most people try to be introspective. I mean, when I say try, like you need time to do that. I'm doing a podcast on this. It's from Harvard Business Review, January 4th, 2018. What self-awareness really is and how to cultivate it. That's where I got that for you. So actually I've got it right here. So let me just talk about it. The 4 self-awareness archetypes: introspectors, seekers, pleasers, and aware. So that you want to get to aware. This which is great. I mean, because you want situational awareness. You want to be able to quickly identify things that are changing in your environment. But so the pleasers, I see these people in situations where school boards are micromanaging. Like they want to know, like, why did you spend, this $4 and whatever on this fidget thing? I mean, it gets down to that. So you get people who just want to appease the board and not, so they kind of get caught up in that. Seekers, they don't know yet. Okay. They don't yet know who they are, what they stand for, or how their teams see them. So, I mean, typically if you're kind of new into this, it's probably that seeker role. Introspectors, which I think probably most of us fall in. And I would say for a long time I was there. I think I've moved over to awareness, but for a long time I was in the introspectors. So they're clear on who they are, but they don't challenge their own views or search for the blind spots and feedback. I once, in my first job as a director, I remember having a school psychologist approach me regarding a student matter and said, I want to talk to you about this. And it was something where I had made up my mind on a certain course of action that we were going to take. And the psychologist had a very sound counter argument to this. And I remember about 2-3 minutes into this, she stopped and she said, you've already got your mind made up. Like whatever I say isn't going to make a difference from this point forward. And I stopped and I was like, oh my goodness, like you're right. Like I did, like I was just waiting for this psychologist to get done saying what she needed to say. And so I could move on with my decision, which was the sign of a raw learning, or not, of a raw director. Like I wasn't seeking awareness. Like I felt, I knew that my decision was going to be the correct one, quote unquote correct. But yet this person had a lot of experience. It would have done me well to have that discussion with this professional. I wasn't recognizing that professional's expertise in that matter. So it was a learning point for me. And I'm very glad that person called me out on it that day, because I, from that point forward, handled things differently in those situations. And I did thank that person. And it didn't turn into this big adversarial wall between us, because I came back and said, you're right. You're right. And thanks for telling me that. So let's start over and let me listen to what you have to say, and then let's talk about it. So, just really, really big for introspection. The other part that goes into that is having this member check group. And I kind of talked about that as like other directors that you can talk to, or principals, but it needs to be people that know the world that you live in. Okay. So people that understand what it's like to be a pupil services director or in school administration. And these are people that you can go to whether they be in your class here or other districts and things like that. I had my member set, still member check group, still do. And I can go to that group and I can say, here's an issue I have. Not that you're sharing confidential information, but here's an issue, something that's come up regarding pupil services, non-discrimination, and here's how I'm thinking of handling it. But what do you think? Like, what do you think am I missing something that's obvious? Is there somebody I need to talk to? And again, without sharing confidential information. But the member check, though, is the person who's going to be completely honest with you and say, listen, like, I think you're being too narrow on this, or I think you need to, give this person, you need to go back and get more information from this person, because it doesn't seem like you really have like all of the information. Somebody who's going to point these things out to you, and that is also the person who's going to call you up someday and say, listen, like, we've just had whatever. We just had a situation where we had a bomb threat, and I have a high school student with anxiety, and this student wouldn't leave the building unless he had his backpack, and the staff member wouldn't let him because all of the backpacks were supposed to stay in the school, and it became this big issue, and the student got real confrontational and just ran out with the backpack, and so now we're looking at a suspension because the student didn't follow the rules and all of this other stuff, and so like, here's what we're thinking of doing as a district. What do you think, Dave, or what are some things that we should look at? And I might give some other thoughts on that. Maybe it's happened to me, maybe it hasn't, but I'd say, have you done X, Y, Z, or, is it something where you can change your practices going forward? Was it really that disruptive? And also, I guess, there's so many ways to do this. But that was actually authentic, by the way. And the district ended up, ready to almost like expel the student. And this was a student who, looking into the history, the social worker had found that the student had things stolen from him often. So like was very afraid to leave the building, didn't have any contraband, anything like that in his backpack, but very afraid to leave the building because his backpack could be stolen. So in taking this backpack and with all of that, understood in the fact that, like this wasn't considered before that this even could happen. And no one was really anticipating it with this student, that the school then, reevaluated that and backed down. And they're like, well, we're not going to expel this student because of this. I mean, there's some real compelling circumstances to why this happened. So that's, again, jumping in as a student services director. But, again, these member checks, these are the people who can be very honest with you and give you that feedback, or else the people who can say, it sounds like you've got your mind made up on this already. And is that really what you want? And maybe it is, but the other side is you're gonna value what that person says. So yeah, the member checks can be raw. In research, it's very common to have member checks. So when I did my research, my doctoral dissertation, I had, 3-4 people who were member checks, who were also researchers or experts in the material. And I remember one, I was on vacation up in Superior, and this person, had an area of expertise in this one model that I was using, and just said, I see where you're going on this, Dave, but like, I don't think your argument supports it. Like, I just don't think, and I was like, trying to convince him, and he's like, okay, I'm the member check here, and I'm like, yeah, you're okay, and not that you have to agree, but at least it makes you reflect and think, and so then I could see where that person was coming up. So then it made me reflect upon that. But the worst thing, it's going to be natural. You're going to want to get defensive on this stuff because. A lot of times people, come at you and they want certain outcomes to be what they're interested in. You have a whole system, a school system, in the best interest of the child across different environments and all of that needs to be weighed out. So yeah, it gets very beneficial to have that group, that member check group, to really help you kind of calibrate your thoughts from time to time. So I just want to put that out there. I think it's really a useful thing. So thank you so much for being active posters in this class. I do appreciate when you watch the Fireside Chats. If you want to comment, great. But again, I will continue to do these, continue to do the shout outs, and please get started on your learning team assignments. And I don't know what the weather's going to be like the next time we have this. Maybe we'll be in a blizzard, which my daughters would love because they want to get outside on the sledding hill, which is at the end of our property. And right now it is just grass. So they want to get the sleds and the sledding tube out there and set some distance records. And I guess I'm all for that because we only have, probably about 6-8 weeks of winter left. So, which I'm not against because I want to get my bike out too. So, all right, everybody, take care and thank you so much. You're brilliant folks. You're brilliant. I read your post. I respect what you do. I'm in awe. I mean, you're a wonderful. This is a wonderful class. You're talented. And please just continue to be open and share documents and perspectives. You're really exceptional. So, and I want to tell you that you're doing a great job. So thank you so much.